Hodgson.
I was a little surprised that the National Party's stopped. Huh? Timatai. Thanks very much, Leader. Thanks very much. Yeah. Tuck in your shirt. Yeah. Oh, you can't? OK. Now, Mr Chairman, Mr Speaker, I was a little surprised that the National Party didn't take the call, but I'm very happy to take the call, and I want to make a point at the outset. Because we are going into urgency, I'm not going to give a 30-second speech. And the case for me giving a 30-second speech is very strong. This is legislation that is now in its last phase. It has been done and dusted through this House, through the various phases of that legislation must go, and it's been spoken about at length by people who know about the legislation and also at length by one or two folk who don't. For those who do, the listener would have no difficulty working out what the legislation was about, what its origins were, how the Select Committee worked, what a great person the chair was, what a great group of folk the Banking Association of New Zealand was, how good the officials were after we'd had a little earlier disagreement, and what the role of this legislation is in our country and the role that it plays in our relationship with other nations. That doesn't need to be repeated. It's something which is well understood now, and folk have been generously talking about this legislation and its role for hours and hours. So a 30-second speech would be a really good idea. But you see, we've got to teach the government to manage the House better. We don't mind particularly staying around on a Thursday night. Half of us are here anyway. It doesn't much matter. Just doesn't matter. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. Now we've just been advised. We've just been advised by the intellectual giant opposite that because Labor lost the last election after spending 9 years in government, the longest time a Labor government's been in power since the Second World War, he said parenthetically that because of that, somehow or another, I should be giving a 30-second speech and not a 10-minute one. That leap of logic, that paroxysm, cascading paroxysm of intelligence that just emanated from the vaguely humanoid piece of protoplasm over there, Mr Speaker, is not something that stands up to scrutiny. And so I'm going to sit here and make a point of wasting Parliament's time. Make a point of it. Do it until... What's it say? Oh, OK. So I'm going to make a point of wasting Parliament's time because the Honourable Jerry Brownlee's in the House and it's good to see him, and we just want to say to the Honourable Jerry Brownlee, can you just try and manage things a little better so that we don't find ourselves doing as we did a few weeks ago, kind of lifting early one day, whipping back in under urgency the following day? It's not necessary. In other words, there are certainly times when a House needs to go into urgency. There are times when a House... now they're really getting annoyed about it. And that's great, because that's the whole point of my speech. That was the whole point of it. Because, you see, if you go silent, you see, I've got nothing to bounce off. The way to shut down someone who's trying to waste Parliament's time is to go quiet. And if you heckle, then I've immediately got something to feed off. You give me oxygen. So can I say to the National Party, please keep the noise running. I love it. It's what makes it work for me. I have no difficulty getting through 10 minutes. In fact, I get through 10 hours. So there's another one, a heckler. The Member of Parliament from Timaru. I spent last weekend in Timaru, and I've got one or two things to say to that Member of Parliament about her, which I have learnt from Timaru, from her constituents on Saturday and Sunday. But unfortunately... Trevor Mallard was there on Monday, so he's got an update. I dare suggest that if we tried to introduce that material into the debate, Mr Speaker would say that it was getting a bit broad, so I won't do so, because I might get ruled out of order. I just say to the member for Timaru, she'd be well advised not to heckle, because you see, another 30 seconds has gone by. Or was it 60? And I'm happy to sit here. I'm happy. I've studied Fidel Castro. It's not difficult to speak for 6 hours. I've watched the man do it. He's an amazing sort of a gentleman. I wouldn't be given 6 hours because the rules of the House say... Ven Young, 75 minutes. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that astonishing? So I just want to say to the members opposite that we could have had this legislation through a long time ago, well through into the next piece of legislation, well through, well down the order paper, but for the fact that the government's decided that it doesn't know how to run the House properly again and is going to put the House into urgency again. I'll just say about urgency. Urgency is a legitimate thing for a government to do. We did it a lot in government. The previous national government did it a lot. But we did it out of necessity because there was some degree of urgency over this, that or the other piece of legislation. And what we've got here is the government showing its inability to manage the House in ordinary times. Not in extraordinary times, but in ordinary times. And that didn't happen to the Bolger-Shipley government until the 8th year. But here it is in about the 10th or 11th month. I can remember in the 8th year of the Bolger-Shipley government, and I will come back to the money laundering point, when Jenny Shipley said that she was going to run the House with machine-like efficiency, it stalled. It stalled, actually, when Max Bradford tried to get the electricity system wrecked. But you see, the mismanagement is now reaching the Plimsoll line. No, that's outside the scope of the bill. Mr. Speaker, he's a very accommodating speaker, and I don't think we should abuse the accommodation that Mr.
The ship might be carrying laundered money.
The ship might be carrying laundered money. Now that's the point. That's the point. In fact, some money laundering, I am sure, occurs on the sea. I have no doubt. Some will occur by air, and some will occur by wire. But some of it will certainly occur by sea. And the question is, if it's a... Yeah, that's right. And that's why the Plimsoll line is important, because if it's folding stuff, the Plimsoll line is visible, whereas if it's solid gold, the Plimsoll line disappears. And that's one of the things. If you're a money laundering cop, that's one reason why you would want to look at the Plimsoll line, because if it's gold-bearing and gold-laden, then we're going to see the Plimsoll line out of sight. And if it's folding, as my colleague, the Honourable Trevor Mallard says, then we are going to see the Plimsoll line high and mighty. Yes, but paper is not as heavy as gold. You see, that's the point. The Honourable Trevor Mallard makes a good point, but it's not good enough. Gold is heavier. So, a dollar's worth of gold is heavier than a dollar. A dollar's worth of gold, actually, it probably isn't. When I think about it, like if it's a gold coin, there's probably a gold coin versus pure metal gold. You know, probably Honourable Trevor Mallard's correct. Mr. Chairman, it's my time. Finished. How much longer? 2 more minutes. So we're just reflecting now on whether or not a gold coin being laundered on the sea is going to have the Plimsoll line more likely to disappear. And I think on reflection, given that the price of gold these days is a little over $1,000 per ounce, per ounce, US, that probably the Honourable Trevor Mallard is right and probably I am wrong, that gold in the form of pure metal is likely to be lighter dollar for dollar than a gold coin. On the other hand, if we move to folding, then I'm correct. And so it's as often in these things, the devil is in the detail. It depends on the denomination of the note. OK, well, we could play that. We start at $5. We go on up to around about 100. I don't know is there a $200 note? Can anyone tell me? I don't think there is. But at $5 or at $100, I still think I'm correct. On the other hand, if we're talking $1 and $2 coins, I think my colleague, my learned colleague, almost the Honourable Trevor, not learned, my non-learned colleague, the Honourable Trevor, is probably correct. So, when trying to detect money laundering on the sea, the Plimsoll line, I think we can conclude, is probably not as much use as we would have hoped, because one doesn't know whether one is dealing with pure gold metal or with folding, and with folding, if folding, then at what denomination, or indeed whether it's $1 or $2 coins, because you see, the Plimsoll line is going to bounce up or down depending on all of those factors. And I would imagine that the Plimsoll line would sit out of the water highest if we've got $100 notes. My point, I hope, is now made, Mr. Brownlee.
I call Todd McClay.